Not gonna work. Nope. So this is going to be a highly unscientific and unprofessional and possibly very biased video. But anyway, this is what I think of the GH5. Of course, the first thing that really concerned me about getting into the GH5 or any of these cameras was just the whole thing about micro four thirds, and was it going to be suitable? Was the image quality going to be good enough? Especially if I shot some photos with it, and also generally low light and the shallow depth of field considerations that really originally I'd wanted to have a full frame camera. When I traded up from the Rebel series Canon cameras, I was for years thought I was just going to go into maybe a 5D of some sort, you know, just a full frame Canon of some kind. But as we know, Canon really didn't keep up in the video area with some of the other manufacturers, so that kind of took that off the table, because video quality was really super important to me, because that's most of what I've been doing with these cameras in terms of paid jobs. I do a lot of guitar instructional videos and things like that, and I really needed to improve the resolution and just get that get some of the problems that I was having with noise in the shadows and things like that down, but I still really felt like I needed to go to 4K at the same time. So while the Canon cameras could have checked a lot of those boxes, the 4K, to get anything in Canon's line with 4K was super expensive, and still kind of handicapped by the codec and so forth. So that really just made it a little impractical for me. So I decided to look at Sony and of course the Panasonic Lumix cameras. And again, I think it was the ergonomics of the Panasonic that really drew me to it, because it did feel very familiar having come from the Canon line. Now, one of the first things that really excited me about this camera was the Ibis and the Dual IS that was available in this series. Those were things that I just had never experienced before and wanted to experience, but I did not want to have to buy a gimbal and carry that around all the time. So so this smooth handheld movement it really was kind of a matter of interest for me, but I think that once I got it, I realized how much potential it had. So once I started experimenting with it, mainly for a while I was just chasing my cats around with the camera and some critters outside and so forth, and I saw how effective it was. And then I got an opportunity or two to shoot some bands live and do some things like that with the camera. It really ended up being very effective, and I didn't really feel the need to get a gimbal at any time soon. So that's really been an exciting surprise to me, is how much I like the image stabilization in this camera and in the lenses that pair with it for the Dual IS. So one of the biggest things that I know people are concerned with these cameras is the video autofocus and or continuous autofocus in video modes. But for me, most of the time I don't do what I'm doing right now, where I really have to rely on it chasing me around in real time or anything. I just lock focus on whatever it is that I'm needing, or if I'm following a subject, I kind of have to control it anyway. And I don't really find any of those autofocus systems of any of the camera manufacturers to be completely flawless, at least not from what I've seen other people doing with those cameras. So to me, there's a certain amount of risk anyway with autofocus, and that really takes that a little bit off the table. I know that some people have a different experience with that, especially people who are just full-time vloggers probably have a totally different opinion about that. But for me, it's not really that big of an issue. Now, related to that is the issue of focus by wire lenses that are used with these Panasonic cameras and Micro Four Thirds in general. But I've just kind of gotten used to it now. At first it was not pleasant, that's for sure. But over time you kind of get used to it and you start working with it, and you kind of learn to get a feel for it. And you can kind of make it work. I've been able to overcome that little obstacle for the most part, and that's not really a big issue for me anymore. Battery life with this camera has been pretty decent. I think it's just kind of a thing that you have to expect with mirrorless cameras. And all the sort of computing that's going on in these things, and especially when you're running the in-body image stabilization, dual IS, all these different little features, it tends to, damn, that was a scary bug. It tends to eat some battery life, and whenever I don't need it, if I need to lock the camera down or anything, I try to remember to turn off any of those features that I don't need, and that helps a bit. But otherwise, you just kind of have to keep an eye on it. I did get 3 extra batteries so that when I'm out shooting with this camera away from home, I can kind of deal with that issue. You got to keep an eye on the battery life, but it's not bad. Just remember to turn off anything that's not essential when you're using it. Another thing that's been a pleasant surprise with this camera has been the preamp for the microphone. So most of the time with the Rode Video Mic Pro, I'm just running it at 0 dB and then putting the levels on the camera wherever they need to be, and it's been pretty clean and pretty useful. In this particular example, there's probably a lot of little ambient noises going on, so the noise floor might be a little bit hard to perceive accurately, but generally speaking, I just would say I vouch for it that it's a pretty good preamp, and I don't normally use it for anything related to recording music if I don't have to. But I do a safety, make sure I do a little safety with it by attaching a Rode video mic and just kind of capture something generally in case there's something wrong with the external recorder. That's an area that doesn't get mentioned a lot, but it's certainly a big improvement over my Canon cameras that I had in the past. I can't say anything about the newer Canon cameras because I don't have one, but this was a big improvement over the previous, the Rebel series Canons. Damn bugs. When I first got this camera, I was really disappointed in the Panasonic app. It just seemed to be really kind of janky, and it wouldn't show a full screen when you were trying to do anything where you're videotaping yourself and needed to monitor the screen or anything like that. I just didn't even want to use it at all at first. And I didn't for a while, and then after a while I found out about an app called the Field Monitor, and that was much better. It costs a little bit, I think it was like 25 bucks, and it was a lot better. And I used that for a while, but then Panasonic did start to improve and make some really good updates to that app. So I did eventually start using that app a lot more, and it's actually been quite good. Now I think it went from being the worst thing I could imagine really for a camera like this to being quite good, almost as good as I could ask for it to be under the circumstances. So yeah, I would give that a bit of a thumbs up at this point. Is the Panasonic app much better than it was about 6 months ago? So yeah, big improvement there. So the variety of video modes and frame rates and all the different features in there in terms of being able to do slow motion and to capture more color and so forth. These things really, to me, are a great attribute to the GH5 and make it something that's not only a versatile and capable tool, but also something that sort of inspires your creativity, or at least for me, it inspired me to learn about things that I just previously had not been exposed to. Something to really consider there if you want a camera that'll make you kind of stretch and grow a little bit beyond just the sort of point and shoot approach to video. The GH5 is certainly capable there. So one of the biggest considerations with the Micro Four Thirds system is that you can't really get as shallow of a depth of field as you can with, say, the full frame or even APS-C cameras. For video, I've found that sometimes if you go too shallow, it just the issues with focusing just become really kind of insurmountable. So I've really, I mean, I don't care how good of a system you've got for focusing, it's just you have no leeway for the subject to move backwards or forwards or to and from the camera. So it becomes just too fine of a plane of focus to deal with. In regards to stills photography, I would say this camera is far more capable than most people give it credit. I've used it a lot for photos, probably about 50-50. When I first got the camera, I would say I was more like 80-85% video oriented in the choice. Certainly a lot of cameras that I would have chosen over this in terms of just straight up stills photography. But I've been really happy with it. I can switch between really excellent video to really excellent photography. Damn bug. So really, I consider this camera to be an exceptional example of a hybrid, truly hybrid camera. I think up until recently, most hybrid cameras were still 75% photo and 25% video capable, but this one really does kind of split it down the middle, even though most people think of it as being more of a video camera. I wouldn't say it's great for every kind of photography, but it's been really good for a lot of the different things I've used it for. The only time I've really had a little bit of a wrestling match with it has been shooting still photos of a band in a kind of dimly lit club. It struggles a little bit in that low light, so that's something to consider. It's not a super easy camera to use under certain circumstances. Not the kind of camera you can really just hand off to somebody that hasn't had any experience with it, and especially if they haven't shot with interchangeable lens type cameras before. So that's something to consider. If you're looking for ease of use, it might not be the best choice. But as far as a camera that will give you a lot of potential, incredible bang for the buck, it's really kind of hard to beat it. And on that note, I'm going to get the heck out of these woods before these bugs just really take me down. Even though I bought this camera really thinking I would shoot in 4K all the time, I've really found that 1080 has been quite sufficient for a lot of the things that I'm doing, especially any kind of YouTube stuff. That's another thing that was kind of a surprise to me, is I've actually been really happy with this camera's ability in just 1080p. Plus all the slow motion has been fantastic, whether it's 1080p 120 frames or even the 4K at 60 frames, which I use a lot actually. And then sometimes I just downsample things into 1080 at the end. If I need the 4K, it's there, and I have needed it. It's been really excellent, and the resolution, the image quality is just awesome. But it's got some really good image quality in 1080p, so that's been a real surprise, a little bonus, and super helpful when you just don't want to use that much data. In this video, I'm using the 12 to 35 f2.8 version 2, which has been a great lens. It's got exceptional image stabilization, especially when used with this body. I also have the 35 to 100 f2.8 version 2, and it makes a great little set with this lens. Again, great image stabilization and really exceptional sharpness all the way to the maximum aperture. So that's definitely, to me, sort of a must-have with this camera, is to have those two lenses so you can get the benefit of the image stabilization and that sharpness and a pretty fast aperture. Now, additionally, I have a couple of prime lenses. I have the 42.5 f1.7, which is kind of a little bit of a budget portrait lens. It's like less than $400, I think, but very good for the money. And then in addition to that, I have the 25mm f1.4 Panasonic Leica Prime. It produced a beautiful image, but it does have a bit of fringing, but aside from that, I really love that lens. I kind of just live with that little anomaly. Those four lenses have been really great, and they've really encouraged me to consider just staying with micro four thirds for a while and maybe expanding that lens collection to include even some of the faster ones. Hopefully I'll figure out how to work the Olympus Pro line into the budget at some point. So it's really hard to make a concise video about a camera like this, because it's capable of so many different things, and you can use it in so many different ways. And add to that, I have a tendency to yammer on and on about things, so that makes it a lot worse. But if you can tolerate more of this kind of thing and this didn't just completely wear you down, hit like, subscribe, and come back to see me soon, and we'll see you in the next one. I feel like such an idiot doing this.